A fun weekend camping trip for a young couple ended up turning into a nightmare when another person close to their campsite decided to fire shots into the woods because he was claiming he saw Sasquatch.
Strange things are happening all over the Appalachian Mountains, but it isn't just in the woods where people are experiencing strange things. Dozens of eyewitnesses are reporting strange things in the sky as well, even during broad daylight. And as you guys are going to find out in today's episode, the Appalachian Trail is a hotbed for all sorts of anomalies and mysteries that will shatter the way you view reality. You won't want to miss this one. On July 28th, at around 2 in the morning at Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky, a strange man appeared to several campers in the area. However, the only thing more unsettling than his appearance was the message he had to deliver. Brad Ginn and Madeline Durand, campers at Mammoth Cave National Park, were just hanging out, enjoying the beautiful night, and enjoying a genuine camping experience. Now, at this point, it was pretty early on in the morning, and so they're sitting around the roaring fire, the sounds of crickets in the distance, and as they're lost in conversation, Brad decides to check his phone, and he notes that it's almost 2 in the morning, but hey, it's summertime. There's no reason to turn in early, right? Well, as they continue conversing, Brad decides, you know what, it's time to turn in, and so, very shortly after, he goes and crashes out. Now, at some point shortly after this, Brad wakes up to some strange noises that are happening right outside of his tent, and so he's kind of coming to and realizing they're getting louder. Immediately, he realizes that it's a person approaching their tent and is off-put by this because he thinks something bad is about to take place. And for anyone watching this, if an individual began approaching you, especially early on in the morning, I would feel like it could really only be one of two things. Either someone is in need of help, or they're looking to hurt you. Okay, maybe not hurt you, but I wouldn't consider it a good thing. And as this mysterious person gets close enough, they start talking to Brad, claiming that something had destroyed their campsite. And then they said something very strange, which was something along the lines of that this was Bigfoot country, that Brad needed to be careful. He was in the process of searching for whatever had destroyed his campsite and warned both of them to be very careful.
They said that it was also Bigfoot country, which seemed a little weird that they would say that.
The individual then informed them that they were searching for whatever destroyed their campsite and warned them to be careful.
He said, I hope you have weapons, and then he, flashed his gun at us. It was I have this, so if anything happens to you, then just yell and I'll come.
Before he departs, he explained that he hopes Brad and Madeline have weapons, and that if anything ever happens, that these two should just yell and he'll come. Then he told them the most terrifying part. If they hear gunshots, run. What an odd thing to tell a random stranger in the middle of the night, right? Well, check this out. How would you even begin to go to sleep after that? And probably just a few minutes after this, Brad explained how him and Madeline saw this man's lights approaching yet again, and before they could even formulate any sort of response or any thought as to what to do, they just began to hear this man yelling something along the lines of, "Oh my God, do you see that? There it is!" And, they're looking out from their tents, it's dark, so they can't really see that well, and they're not exactly sure what this man's yelling about. They probably think he's just off his rocker. And then the man pulls out his gun and shoots into the darkness. Both Brad and Madeline are freaked out. They rush over to see what's happening, and the guy is just telling them that he saw Sasquatch emerging from the brush right near their tent, and it began approaching him. And as you can imagine, you would probably feel pretty intimidated by that, so he just starts firing. Now, shortly after this, Brad and Madeline both called 911 and decided to just hike the 5 miles back to their car in the parking lot, where they would later meet up with park rangers. Now, obviously, something to this degree is going to be taken rather seriously by park officials and law enforcement. Now, whether he had actually seen Bigfoot or not remains up for debate. But interestingly, A spokeswoman for the Mammoth Cave National Park actually made a press statement and confirmed that law enforcement did indeed respond to an incident involving an individual with a firearm about 2 in the morning on Sunday, July 28th.
So Mammoth Cave National Park law enforcement rangers responded to a reporting of an individual with a firearm at one of our backcountry campsites. The rangers made contact with all the parties involved. It is an ongoing investigation at this time.
And that, fortunately, there were no injuries. The only other thing she added was that the incident was still being investigated by park officials. And for those that aren't familiar with Kentucky state law, it is perfectly legal to bring a firearm into a state park. It's just illegal to discharge said firearm. If you guys are like me, you obviously want to see who this mysterious man is. However, upon looking up what little information I could gather, I can't find any records of him. This is a guy who clearly understands that data brokers commonly sell our information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who wants our private information. Things like our full name, our home address, health records, emails, you name it. And if you have a nifty tool like Aura, the sponsor of today's video, it can actually show you the data brokers who are selling the information and then will automatically submit opt-out requests just for you. Unfortunately, it doesn't guarantee protection against Bigfoot. Sorry. However, it does protect you from hackers who now have access to your information thanks to a massive leak on the dark web. If you've ever used AT&T, which I'm sure many of you have, because there's over 73 million customers, you're more than likely in that leak. And because this mysterious man had Aura, he didn't have to worry about using strong passwords, monitoring his account activity, or trying to freeze his credit, or worrying about discharging a legal firearm in a national park. Aura is always on and always working hard, and if you truly value your privacy, like our mystery man does, you can go to aura.com/whatlurksbeneath. That is aura.com/whatlurksbeneath. Now, bear with me before you scoff and roll your eyes at such a ridiculous story. It's interesting to note that Kentucky and Mammoth Cave have had a massive amount of Bigfoot sighting reports over the years. In fact, over the last 20 to 25 years, there have been over 400 Bigfoot reports in this area of the Appalachian Mountains alone. And it's not just the general area. As a matter of fact, there have been supposed sightings within the Mammoth Cave National Park. Back in the summer of 1990, one man claimed to have seen a large, hairy creature down on what he assumed to be on all fours walking around. Now, his initial instinct is that he had run into a black bear, and he began to slow down because you obviously don't want to cross paths with a bear. But this is when this creature surprised him by rising up on two legs and standing somewhere right around 8 feet tall. It actually looked at him, and this is when he could see more detail and definition. Keep in mind he was on his four-wheeler at the time, so he was quickly able to turn and get away, but he noted that as soon as this thing saw him and stood up, it too turned around and bolted off into the darkness. A similar terrifying experience happened on October 18th, 2018 in Sandy Hook, Kentucky. And on this evening, Denise and her husband were simply visiting some family in Sandy Hook. And so after their visit, it's roughly about 7:30 p.m., and so they both get in the car. And keep in mind that because of the time of year, we're getting into fall, so it's already dark and cold. And so he gets on the phone with his grandmother, and they're just chatting away. And it's because of this phone call is why they can remember the exact time. At 7:45 p.m., the phone call ends, and Denise's husband realizes that the low fuel light has now come on. And so he's thinking, oh crap, we can't sit here, we can't dilly-dally any longer than necessary, we need to go and get gas. And so Denise and her husband get in the car, and they're driving down the road, and at this point, nothing spectacular or out of place was really going on. It was just another mundane drive. But if you live in states that have a lot of forest, like Kentucky, you're probably more prone to picking out animals by the road, like deer. And so Denise immediately spots something in the hollow directly ahead of them. And at first, she couldn't really make out many details because it was out of range of the headlights. And if she had to calculate, it was maybe roughly around 80 feet away. When these sorts of things happen, they happen very quickly. So this is all within a matter of 5 to 10 seconds at most. But when you see something like this, that this is so out of the ordinary, it really does stick with you. And so, as she spots what she thinks is a deer, she's about to scream out to her husband that, hey, there's a deer in the road, you need to be careful. This thing, moving quickly, does not crawl or jump, but actually walks across the road. And she had this horrible realization that she just saw it walk on 2 legs, not 4. And so she starts screaming, turn on your brights, there's something in the road. And she could see in those few seconds of illumination from the headlights that whatever this was, it had a very thick abdomen and had to have been at least 7 feet tall. And interestingly, wasn't black, but the color of a tree, so like a grayish brown, very earthy in tone. Of course, the husband only saw movement and saw what he could only describe as a strange shadow, but he never did see the creature or more to the effect of the specifics that his wife saw. Denise explained that she didn't get to see the feet, hands, or any other facial details like the eyes or mouth. Now, what's fascinating is the direction in which this animal was coming from. The area is very tall, steep, and mountainous, and the direction it went as it cleared the road also has a large drop-off and is very steep, a road which happens to be very wooded and very secluded. Now, later on, after Denise and her husband had come back from running their errand, they tried to slowly drive around the area and do some inspecting, but they didn't see anything. Although that night, they noticed the neighborhood dogs were behaving very strangely. They were barking and howling all night long, which did seem unusual. And one of the dogs even acted as if he could see something in the distance and began to growl and stalk before he would take off and go chase after it. Also, apparently, around 2008 to 2010, Denise's own mother had an experience that was also strange and also happened to be in that exact same spot. Except for her, she was walking to a neighbor's house and it was in broad daylight. And as she passed by the area, a couple of rocks were thrown off the hill right beside the road. She was never able to pinpoint or discern the source, but had the distinct impression that something was stalking her from up higher in the hill. Now, what I find very fascinating personally is that while there are a large multitude of Bigfoot and cryptid sightings in and around this area, and specifically the Appalachian region, there are also a plethora of cave systems, many of which remain completely unexplored and hidden away from human contact. It makes you wonder if there truly is some correlation there, that maybe if there are Bigfoot in this region, that they're living down in the earth in the cave system. I know, it's just wild conjecture, but it does make you wonder. Unfortunately, it remains a mystery whether the man who claims to have seen and shot at a Bigfoot actually encountered the creature. The existence of a population of Bigfoot in the Mammoth Cave National Park area and the broader Appalachian Mountain region also remains an unsolved question. Before we get into this next story, we need to understand the entire context. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. In the early 1960s, when Kyle Lovern was around 8 or 9 years old, he and his family were sitting out on their front porch in Nolan, West Virginia. It was a rather quiet and boring life. In fact, it was much the same like everybody else. However, something would happen that night that would change the course of Kyle's life forever and make him question the very fabric of reality that we exist in. His family decided that this evening they would go out and sit on the porch to enjoy the beautiful weather. And as Kyle can remember it clearly, it was in the evening. The sun was going down, and his family sitting there on the front porch, lost in conversation, enjoying each other's company, when Kyle noticed something clearly out of place. And so he looks over and gasps in astonishment and begins pointing. And so naturally, out of reaction, the rest of his family looks over and they spot it too. What all of them could see were clearly 3 oddly shaped UFOs just hovering above a mountain not too far away from Kyle's home. And these weren't just planes, these were objects that were glowing and looked very alien, no pun intended, before slightly tilting and vanishing. Now, after that experience, Kyle had no idea how to explain what this was or what it could have been. In fact, his entire family that was with him was just as baffled. And because of how things were at that time, they just decided not to really talk about it and to keep it to themselves. However, folks, this would not be Kyle's last experience with something bizarre in the sky. Fast forward to the fall of 1973, and it was right around this time there was a strange bit of sightings that happened all along the East Coast. It was here that Kyle himself and a good friend had a sighting of their very own. He and his friend were just casually driving around at night, and they suddenly spotted something off in the distance. Now, at first, this caught both of them completely off guard. They're lost in conversation, and all of a sudden, there's just this bright blue light that goes shooting across the night sky, and it completely took both of them off guard and made Kyle slam on his brakes. And both men had no idea what to make of what they had just seen. Not to mention, they could not explain, just on a pure physics level, how this mysterious aircraft was able to zoom across the night sky at an unfathomable speed, and then there was the strange, ominous, glowing blue light. And how could it just vanish into thin air? Now, immediately, Kyle is brought back to that moment when he was around 8 or 9 years old with his family on his porch, and that was a pretty pivotal moment for him. He realized, oh my gosh, UFOs are definitely a thing and not just a once-in-a-lifetime experience. There really is something to this. Now, to get down to the nitty-gritty and find the truth, Kyle then dedicated himself to the study of ufology and became somewhat known in his small circle. Now that we have the context, let's jump ahead to the date in question. On October 16th, 2012, something strange was spotted above the skies of the Appalachian Mountains. Residents of southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky were going about their day-to-day when suddenly an unidentified flying object appeared, hovering ominously in the clear blue sky. Immediately, people knew who to call, and within minutes, the phone of Kyle Laverne, a local journalist and author of 2 books on UFO sightings in the region at the time, was ringing off the hook at the offices of the Williamson Daily News. Now, you have to understand, UFO sightings are not uncommon in these parts, but what made this incident so strange was that it occurred in broad daylight and witnessed by countless people across the area. As Laverne himself put it, at night you see a lot of lights, which could probably be explained, but this was a daytime sighting. Intrigued by the flurry of reports, he grabs his camera and sprang into action. He had a hunch that this strange object might be visible from just outside the newspaper office, and he was right. Across the street, at the local automotive repair shop, he could clearly make out the UFO just suspended in the sky like some otherworldly apparition. Laverne described the sight as vertical, almost like 2 fluorescent lights together. It was very unusual. It would get real bright, then it would get dimmer, then get real bright again. And as he stood there transfixed by this bizarre spectacle, Laverne's curiosity began to draw the attention of others, the mechanics at the auto shop, their customers, and even Laverne's own co-workers at the newspaper soon found themselves gathered outside, all eyes turned up towards the sky, just marveling at this bizarre phenomenon. Word of the sighting spread like wildfire, and before long, hundreds of people across Williamson, Pikeville, and all around the area had reported the same thing. A strange, luminous object that seemed to defy any and all explanation. Even more intriguing was the sudden appearance of numerous jets flying overhead. Laverne estimates that at least 20 aircraft passed through the area, their presence adding to the already surreal atmosphere. Now, this is only a theory, Laverne had said, but I think this thing was showing up on radar and they were checking it out. So they were so close together and so many of them, I don't think they were passenger jets, but they were so high I couldn't tell for sure. The object remained in the sky for several hours, its purpose and origin a complete mystery. Laverne, determined to get a better look, decided to make his way to the local high school. Now, in hopes to capture some photos from a higher vantage point. But by the time he arrived, this craft had vanished, leaving behind an entire community buzzing with speculation and wonder. However, some of the best images was actually by a high school teacher by the name of Alan Epling. Impressively, he only used a telescope to capture video of it. In fact, in his YouTube video description, he explained that while there were numerous sightings of the same object at the same time, covering a total of 4 states, the sightings were clear, and it was a blue, cloudless sky. And there were no other aircraft in sight. And what's even more bizarre is that this object just continued to hover there in the same location for over 2 hours, never drifting more than 10 degrees in any direction. It was almost as if it was observing those below. I mean, what do you guys think? The sightings quickly made headlines, not just in the local media, where Lovern himself reported on the event, but also in national news outlets. The Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, a Cincinnati-based organization dedicated to investigating UFO sightings worldwide, took a very keen interest in the case, ultimately declaring it unexplained after a thorough investigation. But folks, this wasn't the only sighting. As a matter of fact, there was a similar sighting reported just the day prior in Huntsville, Alabama, and 1 day later in Cross Junction, Virginia. On top of that, there was a third one in Gardner, New York on October 18th. There was clearly something going on here. For a strange UFO in the sky to be seen by all these different people across all these different states, it makes you wonder, what was this? Now, here's where it gets even more interesting, and where things regarding the Appalachian Mountain and Appalachian Trail kind of come together and tie in with everything we've talked about. Kyle Lovern has 2 books. Well, they're more case studies on strange UFO sightings and phenomena all around the Appalachians. And just like Kyle's experience, he had ran into many eyewitnesses who were very reluctant to tell their stories, or would only do it under the stipulation that a different name was used. And as a matter of fact, there's a very notorious sighting that pops up in one of his books about a mountaintop removal mining site up in the Appalachians. It was during this point in time where this witness and roughly 20 to 25 other workers also witnessed the same thing. They described a strange UFO-like craft that stopped and hovered right above the mine site. Then, it did something unexpected. It shone a light down on all of them for a little bit of time, then shot off and moved around the area to another mining site that was in a nearby valley. Remember that this was spotted by 20 plus individuals, and they all corroborated the same story. Now, I don't want you guys to think for a second that these are isolated incidents. As a matter of fact, there's an entire Facebook page dedicated to strange UFO research, specifically in the Appalachian area. I mean, let's be real though, the Appalachian Mountains span quite a bit of land, so there's a lot of room to play with. However, when we actually look at some of these cases and sightings by all these eyewitnesses, there does seem to be some continuity. On February 14th, 2024, a man had just gotten home from picking up his niece and decided that he would spend the evening out on his porch, much like Kyle did. As he was sitting on the porch enjoying the evening breeze, he decided to look up because something had caught his eye. And as a matter of fact, what he thought at first was a plane or a satellite turned out to be something not of this world. He looked up and he realized that what he was looking at was none other than this bright, hazy glowing UFO heading off in the eastern direction. Now, we want to note here that there are lots of planes and satellites that go over this man's house, but this object moved much slower than any of those. So, quickly thinking, he reaches down into his pocket, pulls out his phone, and starts recording for over 30 seconds. And he's just mind blown at what this is and the fact that he's actually capturing it. And after about 30 seconds of filming this, he decides to end the video, put his phone away, and he begins to watch this more closely, and he realizes there's something he's missed. There's something else there. He sees this small star-like object following the larger one pretty closely. Then, he notices that all of a sudden, these two objects have both stopped emitting this really bright light, and appeared to emit a very bright light from the bottom of the craft. And he went on to state that this was not an ordinary light. It was almost perfectly cylindrical, like a cone emitting towards the ground, but it didn't quite reach that far. And so he's trying to quickly think, and he's trying to pull out his phone to record it, but he missed it by just a few seconds. He was able to record about 1.5 minutes of this strange object until the lights completely dimmed to a star-like brightness, and that was that. Now, what's interesting is that these two lights seem to converge into one solid object and look almost like a black triangle of sorts. Eventually, after some time had passed, they kind of just dimmed out of existence and could no longer be seen in the night sky. This eyewitness, who never mentioned his name, also noticed that when he initially saw this strange object, that it had a bright white light with this kind of hazy glow around it. To further aid in the authenticity of this man's sighting, the weather conditions were great, with the sky being completely void of any clouds and everything very visible. However, anonymous lights and strange things spotted in the skies above the Appalachian mountain range have gone back many, many years. In fact, these became such a widely viewed phenomenon that they even earned themselves a name, the Brown Mountain Lights. Now, one of the earliest accounts of these was actually published back in the Charlotte Daily Observer in 1913. But sightings aren't sparse like you might think. As a matter of fact, they've been happening for years and years all over. Now, you might be sitting there saying, well, hold on a second. All these strange anomalous lights could easily be light distortions in the lens or even small insects. The only problem with that assumption is that the video in question was filmed in the wintertime, and I'm pretty sure lightning bugs, as they're known in this region, are not active. There has to be an explanation for all this strange phenomena, right? I mean, normally I would agree with you. The Brown Mountain Lights anomaly isn't isolated to just what's been caught on film. I want you guys to understand that this anomaly is so widespread, there are so many different facets to it, including but not limited to the history, old sightings, and new sightings, that we would just need an entire video series just to do it justice. Unfortunately, the tube-shaped UFOs seen by Kyle and others in neighboring towns, along with the ones he saw in his youth, as well as the other unusual lights and UFOs in the area, and the phenomena known as the Brown Mountain Lights, all continue to be unexplained mysteries. And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment down below, stay out of the mountains. So that way I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy content like this, where we deep dive into storytelling of strange, bizarre cases of the mysterious and the supernatural, then what are you waiting for? Slap that like and subscribe button right now to check out more content just like this. And as always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.